Part 1. The Siege of Drelver 9. 700-word explanation. Drelver 9 was a quiet mining colony on the edge of Galactic Federation space. It wasn't famous, powerful, or strategic, just another rocky world where Varelians mined heavy metals like osmium for export. The colony had a population of around 50,000 workers and their families, protected only by a small local militia with outdated weapons. It wasn't a military base. It wasn't prepared for war, but war came anyway. Without warning, the sky above Drelver 9 filled with the black. Blade-like ships of the Krathen Horde, one of the most feared warfaring species in the galaxy. Krathen weren't part of the Federation. They were raiders and conquerors, thriving on destruction. No diplomacy. No negotiations, only blood and fire. Their assault began with orbital bombardment. The surface of the planet shook as plasma. Strikes reduced the outer mining camps to rubble. Communication towers were the first to fall. Then came the landers fast. Insect-like ships that dropped thousands of soldiers onto the ground. The local militia tried to resist, but they were outmatched. The Krathen wore heavy armor and carried advanced weapons. The Varelian stall. Slim beings with soft skin and long fingers had no chance. The colony defenses fell in ours. Whole sectors of the city were burning. Civilians fled underground, but the Krathen followed them, even there. Governor Raylia, the elected leader of Drelver 9, was in a panic. She had never dealt with a real military threat before. Her voice trembled as she sent out a distress signal. To the Galactic Federation, begging for reinforcements, the response she received was cold and bureaucratic. Message received. Reinforcements en route. Estimated time to arrival. 6 standard days. 6 days. The colony wouldn't last 6 hours. Raylia repeated the call. She updated her reports. She begged, pleaded, and even threatened. Still, the response didn't change. No fleet was coming. No Federation army. Just promises. And promises don't stop invaders. By the time the 4th day came, half the colony was under Krathen control. People were dying by the thousands. Refugee camps were being overrun. Remaining militia had fallen back to the central city core last stand. Raylia sent out one final message. It wasn't official. It wasn't even hopeful. It was just her voice, tired and desperate, calling out across the void. To anyone. Anyone who can hear this. Drelver is dying. If there's anyone out there, please help us. And then silence. For hours, nothing came. The cum station was quiet, and even the Krathen slowed their advance, preparing for the final assault. But just before dawn on the 5th day, a new signal arrived. It didn't come through Federation channels. It wasn't marked as official. It wasn't even signed. It was just 5 words in a Terran dialect. Reinforcements dispatched. ETA. Immediate. The colony's remaining leaders stared at the screen. Who sent it? There were no identifying codes. No ship names. Just those 5 words, then something entered orbit. It wasn't a Federation cruiser. It wasn't even a Varelian ship. It was something. Older, bigger, more terrifying. The ship had no flashy colors or markings. It looked like it had been through 1,000 battles. Its hull was black, scorched from plasma fire. One engine was visibly patched with scrap metal, but it moved with purpose and speed, and etched onto its side in rough hand-painted letters were just 3 words: Property of Earth. As the Krathen looked up from their camps, and the Varelians stared in disbelief, the ship dropped a single massive pod toward the planet's surface. It hit the ground just outside the last standing Varelian defense line. The impact was so powerful that it shook nearby buildings and created a small crater. Steam hissed from the pod as its sides cracked open, releasing heavy gas and glowing lights. Everyone, both Krathen and Varelian, held their breath, and then 6 armored figures stepped out. Tall, broad, covered in thick combat suits. Faces hidden behind dark visors. Each one carried weapons unlike anything the locals had ever seen. They didn't speak. They just looked around, and the war began to change. Part 2. contact with the unknown 700-word explanation. The sudden arrival of Earth's reinforcements stunned everyone on Drelver 9. The Varelian defenders had expected a fleet dozens, maybe hundreds of ships full of trained soldiers, medics, engineers, and drones. That's what the Galactic Federation typically sent to a planet under siege. Instead, what they got was something entirely different. A single dropship and 6 armored figures, who walked out of the smoke like they owned the war zone. These weren't ordinary soldiers. Each one of them moved with the confidence of someone who had survived far worse than what was happening on Drelver 9. Their armor looked heavy, thick, and battle-scarred. Their weapons weren't standard Federation tech. They were brutal, oversized, and built for function, not appearance. Most striking of all, there were no insignias or flags on their suits. Just one symbol stamped on their chest plates, the outline of Earth, with a blood-red X behind it. The local militia didn't know what to make of them. The Varelians, a graceful and diplomatic species, weren't used to such raw aggression. They had heard stories about humans natives of Earth, one of the most infamous death worlds in the galaxy. The rumors said Earth's gravity was crushing, its ecosystem deadly, and its wildlife hostile to anything with a pulse. No species that evolved on such a world should have survived. And yet humans hadn't just survived, they had thrived. Lieutenant Sorak, one of the few surviving Varelian officers, gathered the courage to approach the newcomers. His weapon was lowered, his tone formal but cautious. "Identify yourselves," he said, his voice shaking slightly. The tallest human turned toward him. The helmet's visor was opaque, revealing no emotion. A voice, deep and mechanical, crackled from the speaker. "Deathworld Deployment Division. Terra Unit 09, you called? We answer." The words hit like thunder. Sorak blinked. He'd never heard of such a unit before. Not in any Federation manual, not in any military archive. Deathworlders. He whispered in disbelief. He had heard the name, Deathworlders, the most feared classification in the Galactic Federation. A term reserved for species that evolved on planets so deadly, so unforgiving, that life was considered a miracle. Humans didn't just evolve there, they learned to dominate it. Sorak looked at them again only. 6 of them had landed. "Only 6?" he asked, thinking surely there must be more coming. The same human responded, this time with a tone that hinted at dry amusement. "Enough." That one word said everything. The rest of the Varelian militia didn't know what to do. They were used to orders, ranks, and large-scale battle plans. But the humans moved differently. They didn't wait for permission. They didn't debate. They immediately started analyzing the battlefield, setting up strange-looking scanners and marking strategic locations. One of them, nicknamed Brains, by the others, hacked into the colony's old mining system and began converting equipment into makeshift weapons. Another human, nicknamed Bricks, walked up to an abandoned mining exosuit, industrial mech used for carrying rock sand, began rewiring it on the spot. Within minutes, he had turned the exosuit into a walking war machine, welding armor plates onto it and strapping explosive canisters to the arms. He climbed inside, tested it, and gave a satisfied grunt as the servo motors roared to life. The Varelians watched in awe. Meanwhile, Ghost, another human, moved silently through the rubble of old buildings, laying traps and motion sensors. She didn't speak. She didn't even seem to breathe. One moment she was there, the next she was going to camouflage into the ruins like a phantom. The other humans spread out, teaching the militia how to fight using guerrilla tactics and bushes, flanking maneuvers, dirty tricks that the Varelians considered dishonorable. But survival wasn't about honor anymore. It was about winning. For the first time since the siege began, hope returned to the colony. The Krathen, however, noticed the change. Their scouts reported strange activity. Their forward units began encountering sudden, precise ambushes. Mines they didn't detect. Snipers who vanished. Structures rigged to collapse. Back on his war cruiser, General Chak, the Krathen commander, frowned as he reviewed the reports. His troops were getting nervous. Something new had entered the battlefield, something that didn't follow the rules. "These are not Federation soldiers," Chak hissed. "They fight without fear." "No, General," his second-in-command replied. "They fight like they've been through hell." brought it with them. Part 3. The first strike's 700-word explanation, the arrival of the human. The Deathworlders had shifted the atmosphere on Drelver 9. But it was during their first coordinated strike that the true difference became terrifyingly clear. The Varel had expected the humans to hold defensive lines, help rebuild their barricades, and wait for reinforcements. Instead, the humans did something unthinkable. They attacked before the sun had fully risen over the shattered colony. Terra Unit 09 launched their counteroffensive. The humans didn't wait to be overrun. They struck first, choosing aggression over defense, unpredictability over caution. The Krathen were preparing their next wave, confident the colony would fall before nightfall. But they had grown used to facing Varelian tactics, methodical, clean, and restrained. What they weren't ready for was the chaos Earth's warriors brought with them. The attack began with Ghost. She had infiltrated the outskirts of the enemy camp under cover of darkness, her armor blending with the ruined structures. She silently disabled sentries and planted high-yield explosives beneath the enemy's ammo dumps. Even realized she was there until the first explosion lit up the morning sky like a miniature sun. The blast created a shockwave that wiped out an entire line of enemy artillery. The Varelians, watching from the colony walls, gasped in disbelief as a fireball rose over the horizon. Next came Brix, wearing the heavily modified mining exosuit. His suit was reinforced with raw or slabs and powered by a fusion cell. Pulled from a collapsed tunnel generator, he stormed through the enemy lines like a walking tank, crushing barricades and soldiers alike. He carried a makeshift warhammer and old drill shaft, welded with a mass block at the end. When it struck, didn't just break, bones, it vaporized them. Behind him came the others. Burner wielded a homemade incendiary launcher, spreading liquid fire across the Krathen-ass organic war machines. He aimed not just to kill, but to frighten, Stitch. The combat medic followed behind, tending to injured militia and reviving the barely breathing. His hands worked faster than most surgeons. Even while dodging incoming fire, Brains coordinated the assault, using a stolen Krathen frequency. He hacked into their comms, spreading false orders and confusing their chain of command. At one point, he tricked an entire platoon into falling back into a pre-rigged ambush where Ghost and a handful of Varelians were waiting. This wasn't a clean battle. It was dirty, relentless. Tactical in a way that left no room for mistakes. The Krathen weren't just losing ground, they were losing morale. The Varelians, who had been passive defenders for days, now followed the humans into battle. Inspired by the humans' fearlessness, they fought with new intensity. Their aim improved, their hesitation vanished. They didn't ask if they could win anymore. They asked when. From orbit, General Chak observed the chaos unfold. Couldn't believe what he was seeing. His war beasts were fleeing. His fire lines had collapsed. He watched. One of his prized commanders, Captain Colgate, lifted into the air by a human's exosuit and thrown through a transport engine core. Shaq's claws dug into the control console. "Who are they?" he hissed. "They fight like nightmares," his adjutant said grimly. "They are not Federation trained. They're worse." By nightfall, Terra Unit 09 had pushed the Krathen forces back nearly 3 kilometers farther than any Varelian force had managed in days of defense. 2 major sectors of the city were retaken. Civilian bunkers were secured. The colony's power grid was partially restored. The most shocking part, the humans hadn't lost a single soldier, not one. Even among the Varelians, casualties were lower. Than ever before, the humans fought smart. They moved fast, covered each other, adapted constantly, and showed no fear. As night fell over Drelver 9, the Krathen retreated into the ruined mining fields to regroup. Their discipline was cracking. Their warriors whispered about the armored, demons that walked through fire and laughed in the face of plasma. Meanwhile, the humans stood on the walls of the colony, silent, watchful, covered in soot and ash. They didn't celebrate. They didn't speak. They were preparing for the next strike, and the Krathen, for the first time in this campaign, were afraid. Part 4. The turning tide 700-word explanation after their first devastating strike. The humans of Terra Unit 09 didn't pause. They didn't rest. They didn't even retreat. As far as they were concerned, the battle wasn't over until the enemy was either dead or running. And now, for the first time since landing on Drelver 9, the Krathen Horde was doing exactly that, running. The 6 Deathworlders had changed the very rules of the conflict. The Krathen had expected standard Federation tactics, defense, negotiation, attrition. What they got was an aggressive, unpredictable force that operated like a scalpel dipped in fire. Over the next 3 days, the humans launched continuous raids, moving deep behind enemy lines. They never stayed in one place. They hit and vanished, like ghosts. They used the terrain to their advantage, destroyed buildings, tunnels, caves, collapsed factories. All were turned into traps, sniper nests, and ambush zones. Ghost, the stealth operative, made the ruins her home. Her motion sensors and traps decimated patrols long before they even knew she was near. Whole enemy squads disappeared without a sound. Panic began to spread. Meanwhile, Brains continued manipulating the Krathen Coms network. He hijacked drones, redirected troops into minefields, and looped their reconnaissance feeds to show false clear zones. His digital warfare left the enemy blind and confused, but perhaps the most terrifying part was the training. The humans weren't just fighting, they were teaching. The Varelian militia, once hesitant, frightened, and poorly organized, were rapidly transformed under human guidance. The Deathworlders drilled them day and night, not with traditional tactics, but with survival-based, real-world training. How to booby-trap corridors, how to fire while moving, how to hit hard and vanish. They taught them how to think like predators. By the end of the 3rd day, Varelians who once flinched at gunfire were now leading ambushes and taking down Krathen. Commandos with home-built explosives, the morale shift was undeniable. What had once been a crumbling colony was now a war zone bristling with resistance. Even Governor Relia, initially skeptical of the humans, saw the change. From her reinforced command post, she watched footage of a squad of Varelian defenders led by a Deathworlder surround and neutralize. An enemy mech walker, with nothing but repurposed mining gear and handheld charges. She shook her head in disbelief. They're becoming soldiers, she murmured to her aide, because of them. But not everyone was adapting as quickly. The Krathen forces were unraveling. General Chak, orbiting in his heavily armed flagship, was furious. Reports poured in ambushes, disrupted supply lines, entire divisions refusing to advance into areas rumored to contain the Terrans. One particularly disturbing report described a Krathen forward base destroyed in a matter of minutes, its walls breached not by artillery, but by Brix himself, piloting a heavily modified mining mech with flamethrowers strapped to each arm. He had walked straight through their defenses, leaving behind only ash and terror. The psychological impact was far greater than the physical. Krathen soldiers began disobeying orders. Superiors were questioned. Morale plummeted. Whispers of Deathworlders spread like a virus through the ranks. The humans weren't seen as enemies. They were seen as monsters. Legends. Ghosts from the black edges of space. And then, the humans took the initiative again, using stolen Krathen maps. They located the Horde's central operations base buried deep in the northern mountain range, an underground facility believed to be impenetrable. The humans disagreed. "We don't wait," our team leader said. "We finish this." The assault was planned within hours, but they didn't go alone. They brought with them a full company of newly trained Varelian fighters. These weren't the same militia who'd once hidden behind barricades. These were sharp-eyed, determined warriors who had learned from Deathworlders and survived. As the combined force launched their surprise night assault, Krathen had no time to respond. Explosives tore through the entrance tunnels. Snipers dropped. Lookouts before alarms could be raised. Burner cleared corridors with terrifying flames. Ghost shut down backup power. Brix led the charge through the main blast door, ripping it off its hinges, and finally, deep in the command chamber, General Chak himself stood face-to-face with Terra Unit 09. The last thing he saw was a pair of cold, human eyes behind. A cracked visor and then a jagged spear of rebar thrown like a javelin. Ended his war. The mountain base went silent. The war on Drelver 9 had just ended, not with a speech, not with a treaty, but with Earth's message made crystal clear. Don't start a war you're not ready to finish. Part 5. Aftermath 700-word explanation. The war for Drelver 9 ended not with a drawn-out siege or a last-minute evacuation, but with silence. After the destruction of the Krathen command base, the remaining invaders collapsed into chaos. With their leadership gone and their war machines disabled, the remaining units fled into the wilderness or tried to surrender. There were no coordinated retreats, no reinforcements. The Horde had expected to dominate. Instead, they had been broken, and they had been broken by only 6 humans in the hours that followed the final battle. The Varelians walked among the ruins of what had once been the enemy's impenetrable fortress. There was smoke in the air, debris underfoot, and the occasional flicker of flames from still-burning wreckage. But what struck everyone most was the quiet. For the first time in weeks, the sounds of plasma fire, screaming, and collapsing buildings were gone. Governor Relia arrived on site personally, surrounded by her remaining security detail. She walked slowly, cautiously, as if unsure whether the victory was real. She found the humans standing at the edge of the crater, where the Krathen command center used to be. They were still in full armor, scorched, dented, and covered in grime butt. Standing tall, no celebration, no fist-pumping or cheering. Just silence as they scanned the horizon, waiting for any last threat that might appear. Rel A approached the leader of the team, the same one who had first spoken when they landed. She cleared her throat and said, "We expected a fleet." Human turned to her slowly, the faceplate of his helmet cracked, but still in place. His voice came through the external speaker, calm and quiet. "You got 6. She hesitated, then smiled. "And that was all we needed." He didn't reply. Instead, another human Stitch stepped forward to begin treating the wounded. Brick started pulling apart wrecked enemy tech to see what could be reused. Brains was already syncing with the colony's long range. Comes to report the outcome. They weren't there for applause. They weren't there to feel like heroes. They were there to finish the mission. That night, the people of Drelver 9 gathered in the central square of what was left of the colony. Thousands showed up: militia, workers, medics, engineers, and even children who had been hiding in bunkers for days. It wasn't a formal event. There were no speeches, but the energy in the crowd was undeniable. The humans stood off to the side, separate but not unwelcome. Some of the Varelians offered thanks, some saluted, and others just stood quietly nearby, unsure what to say to the warriors who had saved them. A child approached Burner, holding a small hand-drawn picture of a human in armor standing between monsters and a colony. Without a word, the child handed the picture up. Burner accepted it, studied it for a moment, and then gently nodded. It was a rare moment of softness from the Deathworlders, but they didn't stay long. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, the humans walked back to the landing site, where their drop pod still sat, battered, scarred, but functional. Without ceremony, they boarded. The engines began to hum. The hatch sealed shut. Governor Relia ran to the platform. "Wait," she shouted. "Will we see you again?" The response came through a short transmission, "You won't need to." And then they were rising into the sky like a shadow swallowed by the clouds. Hours later, a new message was transmitted across the sector. It was brief but powerful. Drelver 9 is secured. Krathen forces routed. Colony intact. Minimal casualties. Terran response: division. Mission complete. The message spread like wildfire across galactic channels. Governments read it. Armies studied it. Civilians whispered about it. Even Krathen survivors reported it in hushed tones. But one line stood out most of all: reinforcements requested. Deathworlders deployed. It became a phrase spoken with equal parts respect and fear. To the Federation, it was a promise that when all else failed, humanity would answer. To the enemies of Earth, it was a warning that even 6 humans from A backwater death world could dismantle an entire invasion force. And to Drelvernine, it was a legend. The colony would rebuild. Stronger, smarter, and forever changed. Statues wouldn't be made because the humans wouldn't want them. Songs wouldn't be sung because they didn't seek praise. But every generation after would know the story. The day 6, Deathworlders came and saved them all. Let me know if you'd like a short version of the full story, image prompts, or even voiceover script lines for YouTube narration.